The Driftwood Tavern was the kind of place that lived and breathed routine. Nestled at the edge of a quiet coastal town, its weathered wooden sign swung in the salty breeze like a sentinel that had seen too many storms. To outsiders passing through, it was nothing more than a shabby watering hole with neon lights that flickered and a jukebox that still played songs older than the bartender herself. But to the townspeople, it was a second home. And to Emily Carter, it was a mask one she wore every single day. Behind the counter, Emily moved with practiced ease, sliding glasses across the polished wood, pouring drinks without spilling a drop. Her auburn hair was always tied back in a neat ponytail, her sleeves rolled to her elbows as though she had nothing to hide. She was polite, warm when spoken to, but never too open. She laughed at the fishermen's jokes, nodded patiently, at old men who told the same stories night after night, and offered a kind word to the waitresses when they looked exhausted. To the town, she was the smiling face that made the Driftwood feel safe. A bartender, a friend, nothing more. Even in M, called Frank Morrison, a retired dock worker who planted himself on the same bar stool at exactly 7 o'clock. Every night, he adjusted his cap, leaned forward, and tapped the counter twice. "You know my order." Emily smiled softly, already reaching for the bottle of whiskey, one finger neat. "You don't even need to ask, Frank." He grinned, showing teeth yellowed by tobacco. "That's why you're the best in town. You remember everyone." Emily poured his drink, sliding it across the counter with the grace of someone who'd been doing this forever. But inside, she thought, remembering is a habit I can't break. It's what kept me alive once. The bar filled slowly as the evening stretched. Locals trickled in, carrying with them the scent of the ocean, of diesel fuel from fishing boats, of rain-soaked windbreakers. A young couple laughed in the corner booth. A group of construction workers argued good-naturedly near the jukebox, and old country music played low in the background. It was ordinary, safe, exactly the way Emily liked it. But ordinary was also a performance. Every smile she offered, every tilt of her head, every light-hearted comment carefully measured. She never revealed too much, never let anyone glimpse the depth of who she truly was. She had built this life the way a fugitive builds a fortress, one brick at a time, with steady hands and an unshakable will. When the bar door opened with a creak and a blast of salty wind, Emily's eyes flicked toward it instinctively. She couldn't help it. She always scanned new arrivals, assessing posture, clothing, gait. She measured whether they were a threat before she even realized she was doing it. Most times, it was just a fisherman coming in late, or tourists curious enough to brave the locals' hangout. But still, her heart always ticked a little faster in those first seconds. Tonight, it was just Hank, the mailman, who waved sheepishly as he took off his wet cap. Emily let out a quiet breath she hadn't realized. She was holding and returned to polishing glasses. Safe. Frank took a sip of his whiskey, studying her. "You ever think about leaving this place, Em?" She raised an eyebrow. "Leaving? And go where?" He shrugged. "Dunno. You're young. Too young to waste away serving drunks like me. You could have done more with your life." Emily's lips curved into that same easy smile she always gave when someone got too close. "And miss out on pouring your whiskey every night? Not a chance." Frank chuckled, shaking his head. He didn't push further. Nobody ever did. Because Emily Carter was a mystery, but a comfortable one. People respected her privacy because they assumed she was just another soul content with small-town living. They never wondered why she had no family, no boyfriend, no old friends visiting. They never asked why she sometimes locked the door early, claiming she wasn't feeling well, when in truth she was pacing her small apartment above the bar, hand pressed against the window frame, scanning the streets below. The truth was, Emily never stopped watching. At 2 in the morning, when the bar emptied out and the jukebox fell silent, she lingered alone in the dim glow of the neon beer sign. She'd pour herself one last drink, something light, and sit at the counter staring into the mirror behind. The shelves of liquor. Her reflection stared back at her. The auburn hair, the tired eyes, the faint scar along her jawline that no one ever asked about. And she remembered the dusty streets of Caracas, the thick jungle air of Colombia, the sound of gunfire echoing in the night. She remembered a name she no longer said out loud, Agent Hart. It was a name that belonged to another life, another version of herself. A woman trained to disappear into crowds, to manipulate, to kill if necessary. A woman who had once trusted the wrong person and lost everything. Emily swallowed hard, setting her glass down. She shook her head, forcing the memories back into the locked box where she kept them. This was her life now. The driftwood, the locals, the safety of anonymity. She went upstairs to her apartment, where the walls were bare except for a single framed photograph of the ocean. No family portraits, no souvenirs, nothing to connect her to who she had been. Sliding into bed, she listened to the wind whip against the windows. The town slept peacefully, unaware of the secrets lurking above their favorite bar. But Emily didn't sleep easily. She rarely did. Her dreams were restless, full of shadows and unfinished missions. She woke often, checking the locks, making sure the gun hidden in her nightstand was still there. In the morning, she'd put her hair back up, put on her smile, and pour drinks as if none of it mattered. And to the town, it didn't. She was just Emily Carter, the bartender. Ordinary, simple, safe. But Emily knew the truth. Ordinary lives never lasted forever. And sooner or later, the past always walked back through the door. The morning light crept over the coast, painting the water in streaks of silver. By the time the first fishing boats pulled out from the dock, Emily was already downstairs in the bar, mopping floors and resetting tables for another day. She hummed, faintly to herself, a tune without words, just to break the silence. To anyone passing by, she looked like any other hard-working woman preparing for another shift. But Emily's movements weren't careless. Every habit had meaning. She mopped, starting from the corners inward, so her back was never to the door. She wiped glasses while keeping one eye on the reflection in the mirror behind the counter. Even now, years after vanishing from her old life, she lived in a state of quiet readiness. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. When she was 22, Emily Hart was recruited into an intelligence program so secret, even her family never knew its name. She had been chosen not just for her sharp mind, but for her ability to disappear in plain sight. Her training stripped her down and rebuilt her. Languages, surveillance, firearms, hand-to-hand combat, and the most dangerous skill of all, learning to earn someone's trust before tearing it away. Her first mission had been in Venezuela. She remembered the heat, thick and suffocating, and the sound of her handler's voice in her earpiece, calm and steady. Stay close. He trusts you. That's all you need. She'd sat across from a cartel lieutenant, smiling over a glass of cheap rum, pretending to be someone she wasn't, and it worked. Within weeks, she had gained access to their smuggling routes, their safe houses, their entire operation. Emily Hart was a ghost who slipped in, gathered intelligence, and slipped out again. But not every mission went that way. The memory that haunted her most began in Colombia. The operation was called Black Horizon, though Emily could never say the name without her chest tightening. She had been embedded with a group of mercenaries who were supplying arms to a cartel leader named Rafael Mendez. The plan was simple: get close, extract information, and leave. But somewhere along the line, the plan unraveled. She could still hear the gunfire, the screams. Her team had been compromised. Somebody tipped Mendez off, and by the time they realized it was too late. Her unit was slaughtered in an ambush, the air heavy with smoke and blood. Emily barely escaped with her life, sprinting through the jungle with bullets whizzing past her. When she finally stumbled into safety, bruised and bleeding, she swore she saw one of Mendez's men watching her from the trees, smiling. That night, she made a choice. She disappeared. The agency had wanted answers. Why she survived when the rest of her team didn't. But Emily knew the truth. She had been burned, betrayed. Someone inside had leaked her identity. If she stayed, she'd be hunted until they finished the job. So Emily Hart faked her own death. She erased herself from every file, every contact, every traceable record. She cut ties with family, friends, everything she loved. And in her place, she built someone new, Emily Carter, the bartender of Driftwood Tavern. But ghosts didn't vanish easily. As she wiped down the counter that morning, the past pressed in around her. The sound of jungle insects, the feel of dirt under her nails, the weight of a gun strapped to her thigh. She squeezed the rag until her knuckles whitened, forcing the memories back into the shadows. "Morning, Em." The cheerful voice jolted her from her thoughts. It was Jenny, one of the waitresses, bouncing through the door with her hair tied in a messy bun. She carried her backpack slung over one shoulder and smelled faintly of sea breeze and vanilla perfume. "You're in early," Emily said, setting the rag down. Jenny shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd come help before the rush." She grinned, bright and innocent. "You ever get those nights where your brain won't shut off?" Emily forced a smile. "Every night. Sometimes." Jenny plopped onto a stool, watching her. "You know, for someone who runs a bar, you don't really drink much." "I've had my fill," Emily replied casually, pouring herself a small glass of water. Jenny tilted her head, studying her. "You're so mysterious sometimes. Like you've lived 10 lives already, and you're not even 35. Emily laughed, but the sound felt hollow. "That's just the bar keeping me busy." Jenny shrugged, hopping off the stool. She didn't push. No one ever did. But once Jenny disappeared into the back, Emily leaned against the counter, her heartbeat heavy. She hated moments like that, when people saw too much. When her careful walls cracked, even for a second. Because the truth was, she had lived 10 lives, and every one of them left scars. Later that night, when the bar was full again, Emily felt the weight of her past more than ever. A stranger had come in, a man she didn't recognize. He wore a leather jacket, sat quietly in the corner, and nursed a drink without speaking to anyone. Her instincts screamed at her. He didn't belong. His eyes were sharp, his posture controlled. Emily poured drinks with her usual grace, but her mind was elsewhere. She studied him through the mirror as she wiped down the bar. Was he watching her? Did he know? Her heart pounded as she flashed back to Venezuela again, to the way cartel lookouts used to sit in crowded cantinas, pretending to be part of the noise. When the stranger finally left without incident, Emily exhaled shakily. No one else noticed him, but she had. And she knew shadows had a way of finding her, no matter how deep she buried herself. Upstairs, in the quiet of her apartment, she pulled open the drawer of her knitstand. Inside was a small black pistol, its metal cold under her fingers. She hadn't fired it in years, but her hands still remembered the weight, the balance. Emily stared at it for a long time, then set it down gently, closing the drawer. Her past was still out there. Rafael Mendez might be gone from the headlines, but men like him never really disappeared. And if one of his soldiers ever discovered she was alive, her quiet little world would shatter in an instant. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain on the windows. Sleep didn't come, because Emily knew one truth better than anyone else. You can change your name, your face, your life, but the shadows of the past never stop following. And hers were closer than she dared admit. The storm rolled in fast that night. Clouds pressed heavy against the town, and rain battered the old wooden windows of the Driftwood Tavern. Emily Carter wiped the counter with slow, deliberate strokes, her eyes flicking toward the door every time it groaned against the wind. Nights like this were usually quiet. Locals preferred to drink at home when the weather turned ugly, but not tonight. By 8, the bar was half full. Fishermen huddled at the corner tables, coats dripping on the floor. The jukebox played low, muffled beneath the storm. Emily moved through it all with her usual quiet rhythm, filling glasses, offering small smiles, pretending the thunder didn't rattle her nerves. Then the door opened. 4 men stepped inside, shaking off the rain. They weren't locals. Emily knew that immediately. Locals carried themselves with a kind of casual slouch, as though the sea and the town had worn their bones into a permanent ease. These men didn't slouch. They walked with purpose, their shoulders squared, their eyes scanning the room in quiet calculation. Emily froze for a fraction of a second before forcing herself to keep moving. She poured another beer, set it on the counter, and raised her gaze casually. The tallest of them, a man with close-cropped blonde hair and a scar above his eyebrow, met her eyes. It wasn't the look of a stranger taking in a bartender. It was sharper, deeper. Recognition flickered there. Her stomach clenched. They found a booth near the back, their movements precise, coordinated without effort. Soldiers, she realized. No operators. Their presence radiated discipline, the kind she knew intimately. The locals noticed too. Conversations dipped for a moment, replaced by curious glances. Outsiders were rare, especially ones who looked like they belonged anywhere but here. Emily forced herself to breathe. She picked up a tray, crossed the room, and approached their booth. "What can I get you boys tonight?" Her voice was calm, friendly. The voice of Emily Carter, the bartender, not Agent Hart. The blonde one leaned forward, his eyes studying her face with unsettling intensity. He spoke first. "Beer 4. His voice was low, commanding, but not unkind. She nodded, jotting it down as if she needed to. But she already remembered. Back at the counter, she poured their drinks, her hands steady even as her thoughts spun. Soldiers? No, maybe. Special forces. And the way the blonde one looked at her, he knew something. Emily slid the beers onto the tray and carried them back. As she set each glass down, she caught snatches of their conversation. Quiet, clipped words. Something about routes, targets, intercept. Her chest tightened. That language, operational, mission-driven, was too familiar. When she placed the last glass down, the blonde man glanced up again. "Thanks, ma'am." Emily forced a polite smile. "Enjoy." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "You've been here long?" She paused, careful not to let her hesitation show. "Couple years," she said lightly. "Why?" "Just curious," he replied, but his eyes never left hers. Back behind the bar, Emily busied herself with polishing glasses, though she hardly needed to. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced. Who were they? And why did one of them look at her as though he'd seen her before? She caught her reflection in the mirror. Same auburn hair, same tired eyes. She was Emily Carter. She had buried Hart years ago. No one should have recognized her. But the blonde man's stare said otherwise. Hours passed, the storm outside worsening. The locals began trickling out, until only a handful remained. The 4 strangers stayed, their booths still occupied, their voices still low and deliberate. When the last fisherman finally left, Emily wiped down the counter and called out, "Closing soon, gentlemen." The blond man rose, stretching slightly. He walked to the bar, setting his empty glass down in front of her. For a moment, they stood face to face. Up close, she could see the years etched into him, the faint lines around his eyes, the wear of countless deployments. He wasn't a man easily fooled. "You run this place alone?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Mostly. Why?" He studied her, and then quietly, almost like a test, he spoke. "Agent Hart." Her blood turned to ice. No one had said that name to her in years. She didn't flinch, didn't let her mask slip. "Sorry," she said evenly, drying the glass in her hand. "You've got the wrong person." But his eyes told her he didn't believe that for a second. He leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "We don't make mistakes like that." Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her expression calm. "Then you're wasting your time in the wrong bar." He studied her for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "If you say so." He turned and walked back to the booth. Emily's hands trembled as she set the glass down, out of sight below the counter. Her mind was a storm of its own. They knew. Somehow they knew. And if they knew, then maybe others did too. The four men finished their beers and rose to leave. The blond one gave her a final look, part warning, part promise, before stepping out into the rain with his team. The door shut and silence filled the bar. Emily gripped the counter, her breath coming shallow. The name echoed in her head. Agent Hart. They had torn open the lockbox she had sealed years ago. Her carefully built life, her sanctuary, her safety, it was unraveling. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to steady her breathing. The Navy SEALs had walked into her bar, and nothing would ever be the same again. The bar was unusually quiet that night. A soft rain pattered against the windows, blurring the neon glow of the Driftwood Tavern sign into an indistinct smear of red and gold. Inside, the air carried the smell of whiskey and fried food, with only a handful of regulars murmuring over their drinks. Emily Carter moved behind the counter with practiced ease, wiping down glasses, filling pints, and offering smiles that never reached her eyes. To the men who came in every evening, she was the perfect bartender, discreet, polite, and always listening. No one wondered why her gaze often lingered too long at the door, or why her shoulders stiffened at the sound of certain voices. But tonight, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, because the Navy SEALs were still in town. Raines and his team had returned to her tavern after their initial visit, their presence becoming an almost nightly occurrence. They were polite enough, paying in cash, keeping their questions casual. But their eyes were sharp, their conversations hushed. And every time one of them looked her way, Emily felt like the walls she had built were beginning to crack. She poured a bourbon for Raines and slid it across the bar. His fingers brushed the glass, steady and deliberate. "Quiet night," he said. "Just the way I like it," Emily replied, keeping her tone light. But Raines didn't smile. He studied her in silence, and for a heartbeat she feared he might say her real name out loud. Later, after the regulars drifted out into the rain, only the SEALs remained. Their voices lowered, but Emily's ears sharpened despite herself. She tried not to listen, but the words cut through the room. "Cartel leader's been spotted along the coast," Torres muttered. "We've got intel he's moving something through these docks." McBride leaned in. "Mendez. Has to be him." Emily froze. The name hit her like a blow to the chest. She turned her back quickly, pretending to wipe down the counter, but her hand trembled. Mendez, the man who had destroyed everything. The man whose betrayal had forced her into hiding, whose shadow had followed her across oceans and years. She had buried that name, locked it away. Hearing it again was like ripping open an old wound. And worse, if the seals were after him, it meant he was close, too close. Emily's stomach twisted. The life she had built here, fragile and precious, was no longer safe. She tried to keep her mask on, but Rains noticed. Of course, he noticed. When the others drifted toward the back pool tables, he lingered at the bar, his gaze steady. "You've heard that name before," he said quietly. Emily's breath caught. "I hear a lot of names in this place." He didn't blink. "Not like that." Her heart pounded. She wanted to lie, to laugh it off, to keep the fragile glass wall between her past and her present intact. But Rains wasn't just any customer. He had seen people break before. He knew what haunted eyes looked like. "Whatever you think you know," Emily said softly, "you're wrong. I'm just a bartender." Rains leaned closer, his voice low but sharp. "No bartender reacts to a name like that. And no bartender moves like you did when those men started fighting last week. I've seen operators with less control." Emily turned away, but his words pierced through her defenses. She wanted to tell him to leave her alone. She wanted to scream. But instead, she whispered, "You don't know what you're asking." That night, long after the seals left, Emily locked the tavern doors and sank onto a bar stool, her head in her hands. Memories she had fought to suppress flooded back. The heat of the jungle, the stench of gunpowder, the sound of her partner's last breath in her earpiece as Mendez's men closed in. And then the years of running, the false passports, the endless relocations, the paranoia that gnawed at her until she chose this quiet town, believing she could disappear into its rhythm of tides and tavern nights. But Mendez was here, which meant the past had finally caught up. The next evening, Rains returned alone. He waited until the tavern emptied before approaching the counter. Emily tried to busy herself with dishes, but he wasn't here for a drink. "I know who you are," he said softly. Her hands stilled. The words were spoken not with accusation, but with certainty. She lifted her eyes to him, searching his face. "Then say it." "Agent Hart," Rains said. "CIA, deep cover. Vanished after an operation went south in Colombia. Officially listed as KIA." The sound of her old name, her real name, sliced through her. She hadn't heard it in years, hadn't dared speak it even to herself. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Since the first night," Rains admitted. "Didn't say anything because I wasn't sure why you were here. But now, Mendez is moving in on this town. You know him better than anyone. We need you." Emily shook her head violently. "No, I'm done. That life is over. You think hiding behind a bar makes you safe? It doesn't. He's coming. And if he finds you before we do..." Rains trailed off, his meaning clear. Emily's pulse raced. She wanted to deny him, to cling to the illusion of her quiet life. But deep down, she knew he was right. The cartel wouldn't stop. Mendez wouldn't stop. And if she did nothing, the people of this town, the people who had given her a home, would pay the price. Rains slid a small folder across the bar. She didn't want to open it, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Inside were photographs, shipping manifests, grainy surveillance images, coded notes. But what made her blood run cold was the last photo. Mendez, standing on a pier, his face caught in the beam of a spotlight. The same smile, the same eyes. Alive, dangerous, and far too close. Emily closed the folder with shaking hands. "If I help you," she whispered, "it won't just expose me. It will bring the fight right here." Rain's voice was steady. "It already has." That night, Emily walked home through the rain, her mind spinning. For years she had lived in shadows, hiding, denying, pretending. But now the illusion was shattered. Her secret wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the town. It belonged to the seals. It belonged to the past she could no longer escape. As thunder rumbled over the sea, Emily Carter knew the truth. The time for hiding was over. And soon, she would have to choose whether to remain the woman behind the bar, or reclaim the deadly secret she had sworn to bury forever. The Driftwood Tavern no longer felt like hers. For 3 nights, the Navy SEALs had used the upstairs apartment as their staging ground. Maps covered her dining table. Satellite photos and dossiers were pinned to the walls, secured with thumbtacks, pulled from old corkboards she once used for grocery lists. Emily's quiet sanctuary had transformed into a war room, and she was right in the middle of it. At first, she'd resisted. She told them she wasn't Hart anymore, that she had buried that woman for good. But when Commander Raines, the blonde SEAL who recognized her, laid out the facts, she realized there was no escape. "Mendez resurfaced," he said, tapping his finger against the grainy photo of a man she thought she'd never see again. "He's here, on U.S. soil, running operations under our noses. And you," his eyes burned into hers, "are the only person alive who knows his playbook." Emily stared at the image of Rafael Mendez. His face hadn't changed much. The cold eyes, the sharp jaw, the scar cutting across his cheek. The man who had orchestrated the ambush, who had slaughtered her team, who believed she was dead. She had spent years convincing herself he'd vanished into the underworld, never to surface again. And yet, here he was, a shadow that had clawed its way back to her doorstep. She clenched her fists. "You don't understand? If he finds out I'm alive, he won't stop until I'm dead." Raines leaned closer. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance." That night, Emily sat at her kitchen table with the SEALs, her old life bleeding back into the present. She mapped out the cartel's routes from memory, the smuggling networks she'd once infiltrated. Every detail came back with haunting clarity: the coastal drop points, the names of mid-level lieutenants, the coded language they used. SEALs listened intently, scribbling notes, marking maps. Their respect for her knowledge was clear, but Emily felt no pride. Each word she spoke was like ripping open an old wound. "You remember all this after years out?" One of the younger SEALs, Davis, asked, awe in his voice. Emily's gaze darkened. "When you've lived it, you don't forget." "Not ever." Raines cut in, his voice steady. "This intel gives us an edge, but we'll need more. We'll need you." Her chest tightened. "I left that world for a reason." He held her gaze, unflinching. "And now that world is here." The following evening, Emily closed the bar early. A handwritten sign, "Closed for repairs," hung on the door. Inside, she sat with the SEALs, going over surveillance feeds from a safe house the cartel was using just 30 miles away. Her heart pounded as the images flickered on the screen. Men hauling crates, armed guards patrolling, a black SUV pulling in with tinted windows. And stepping out of it, Rafael Mendez. Emily's throat went dry. It was one thing to hear his name, another to see him alive. The SEALs glanced at her. "You okay?" Davis asked quietly. Emily forced her voice steady. "He's here. That's all the confirmation you need." But inside, she was unraveling. The plan was simple on paper. A small team would raid the safe house, disrupt Mendez's shipment, and capture one of his lieutenants for interrogation. Emily's role was supposed to be limited, intel, not fieldwork. She told herself she was fine with that. But when Raines came to her before they moved out, she saw the truth in his eyes. "You know his people better than we do," he said. "If things go south, We'll need you in that truck." Emily shook her head. "No, I don't go out there anymore." Rains didn't argue. He just looked at her, steady and unrelenting. And that was worse, because it forced her to remember the woman she used to be, the one who never hesitated, never feared. Her hands trembled, but when she spoke, her voice was calm. "Fine, I'll go." The night of the raid, rain slicked the asphalt as Emily sat in the back of a blacked-out SUV with the SEALs. The smell of gun oil and damp gear filled the cabin. She adjusted the earpiece in her ear, the weight of a sidearm on her hip feeling both alien and familiar. It had been years since she carried one, yet the metal felt natural, as though it had been waiting for her all along. Rains glanced back at her. "You ready?" Emily stared out the window, the lights of the distant safe house glowing faintly. "In the dark, no," she admitted, "but I'll do it anyway." The operation unfolded with brutal precision. The SEALs moved like shadows, slipping through the night. Emily stayed in the SUV at first, relaying directions into the comms. 2 guards at the north entrance. "They'll rotate in 30 seconds. Move now." Her voice was steady, clipped, professional. The SEALs obeyed without question. But when the firefight erupted, sharp cracks of gunfire tearing through the silence, Emily's instincts screamed. She couldn't sit still. Not when she knew how they moved, how Mendez's men thought. "Stay in the truck," Rains ordered through comms. She opened the door anyway. Her boots hit the wet ground as adrenaline surged. She moved low, fast, years of training reawakening in her muscles. A gunman rounded the corner, his rifle raised. Emily dropped him with a clean shot before he had the chance to fire. The SEALs noticed her over the comms, their voices sharp. "Carter, what the hell are you doing?" "Finishing this," she snapped. She moved with deadly precision, disarming another guard, her hands remembering every strike, every counter. The violence was terrifying, not because she couldn't handle it, but because of how natural it felt. By the time the SEALs secured the compound, Emily stood among them, chest heaving, weapons still hot in her grip. The look on their faces said it all: shock, respect, and the understanding that Emily Carter was no bartender. Back at the tavern, hours later, Emily scrubbed her hands at the sink, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to her skin. Her reflection in the mirror above the bar stared back at her, flushed cheeks, wild eyes, alive in a way she hadn't been in years. She hated it. She loved it. Rains appeared in the doorway, watching her silently before stepping closer. "You saved lives tonight," he said quietly. Emily shook her head. "I crossed a line I swore I'd never cross again." "Maybe," Rains said, "but you also reminded us who you really are." Her eyes darkened. "That's the problem. I don't want to be her anymore." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because they both knew the truth. Once you stepped back into the fire, it was impossible to walk away untouched. Emily Carter's quiet life was gone, and Agent Hart had just been reborn. The Driftwood Tavern was supposed to be safe. That's what Emily told herself as she unlocked the doors the following evening, wiping the rain off her jacket before hanging it on the rack. The bar smelled faintly of salt and whiskey, just as it always had. A few regulars were already trickling in, shaking off the cold, ready for their usual drinks and the comfort of routine. Emily moved behind the counter, forcing her hands to steady. But her mind was still back at the safe house raid. The gunfire, the heat of the weapon in her hands, the way the SEALs had looked at her afterward, as if she were one of them. As if the bartender had vanished, leaving only Agent Hart behind. She didn't want to be her again. And yet, part of her knew it was only a matter of time. The SEALs had left the area temporarily, regrouping with their command. For now, Emily was alone. She told herself she could slip back into the old rhythm. Pour drinks, smile politely, lock the door at closing. Pretend nothing had changed, but something had. The shadows had caught her scent again. Around midnight, the tavern had thinned to just a handful of customers. Frank Morrison dozed at the bar with his half-finished whiskey, while a young couple whispered in a corner booth. The jukebox hummed faintly, masking the sound of rain pelting the windows. And the door opened. 3 men stepped in. Their clothes were nondescript, dark hoodies, damp jeans, but their eyes were sharp, scanning, hungry. They weren't locals. Emily knew it instantly. Her chest tightened. They moved with too much confidence, too much purpose. One locked the door behind them. Another slid his hand into his pocket, where Emily caught the faint outline of a pistol. Emily's instincts screamed. She forced her voice calm, masking the surge of adrenaline. Kitchen's closed, but drinks are still flowing. The tallest one smiled coldly. We're not here for drinks. Emily's eyes flicked to Frank, who was now stirring awake, confused by the tension in the room. The couple in the corner froze, sensing danger. The tallest man leaned against the bar, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Rafael Mendez sends his regards. Emily's blood ran cold. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. Years of training locked her expression into neutrality, though inside, her heart hammered. They knew they had found her. Wrong person, she said evenly. You've got me confused with someone else. The man's smile widened. He pulled a pistol from his hoodie and pressed it against the bar's polished wood. No confusion. You're alive, Agent Hart, and the boss doesn't like loose ends. The sound of the gun scraping across the counter silenced the room. Chaos erupted in seconds. One of the men grabbed the young couple from the booth, dragging them to their feet, a gun pressed to the boy's temple. The girl screamed, muffled quickly by a rough hand. Frank staggered upright, his face pale. Emily's hand twitched toward the drawer beneath the counter, where she kept her weapon. But she hesitated. If she drew too soon, innocence would die. The leader leaned closer, his breath hot, his voice venomous. You're coming with us? Quietly. Or everyone here pays for your secret. Emily's mask cracked just slightly, her voice low, dangerous. They don't know who I am. Let them go. This is between me and Mendez. But the man only laughed. Then they'll die knowing the truth. Emily moved fast. Her hand shot under the counter, gripping the pistol, and in one fluid motion, she fired upward. The first shot shattered the leader's wrist, sending his gun clattering to the floor. He screamed, stumbling back. Before the others could react, Emily vaulted over the bar, slamming her shoulder into the nearest gunman. The weapon fired wildly, the bullet embedding into the jukebox, sparks flying. Patrons screamed, diving for cover. The young couple ducked beneath their table, trembling. Frank dropped flat to the floor, covering his head. Emily fought with brutal precision. She twisted the second gunman's arm until it snapped, then drove her knee into his ribs. He crumpled, wheezing, before she ripped the gun from his hand and leveled it at the third. Drop it. She barked, her voice sharp, commanding. Not Emily Carter, the bartender. Not anymore. This was Hart. The third man hesitated, rage flickering in his eyes, but Emily fired a warning shot into the floorboards. Wood splintered. He dropped the gun. Breathing hard, Emily scanned the room, the weapon steady in her grip. The locals stared at her in shock. Frank's mouth open, the couple wide-eyed with terror. They had seen it all. There was no going back, but the danger wasn't over. The leader, clutching his mangled wrist, snarled, Mendez will kill you. He'll burn this whole town to the ground for what you just did. Emily's jaw tightened. Then he'll have to come here himself. She raised the gun, but before she could fire, blue and red lights flashed through the rain-streaked windows. Tires screeched. The SEALs burst through the door, weapons raised, moving with lethal efficiency. "Down!" Rains barked. In seconds, the intruders were restrained, their guns kicked away, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Emily lowered, her weapon slowly, her chest heaving. Her eyes met Rains's, and in them she saw the truth. He knew what had just happened. She had revealed herself, not just to him, not just to the SEALs, but to the entire town. The aftermath was eerily quiet. The intruders were hauled away, their shouts muffled under the storm. The bar was wrecked, broken glass glittering. On the floor, a bullet hole smoking in the jukebox, overturned stools scattered everywhere. The locals emerged from hiding, their faces pale, their eyes locked on Emily. Frank spoke first, his voice shaky. "Emily, what the hell was that? Who are you?" Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked around at the faces. She had served for years, people who trusted her, who thought they knew her, and now all they saw was a stranger. She lowered the gun, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was all she could manage. Rains stepped in, his voice firm, redirecting the crowd. "You're safe now. That's what matters." But the damage was done. The townspeople looked at Emily with a mixture of fear and awe. The mask she had worn for so long was shattered. They had seen her fight, seen the truth. The bartender was gone. What remained was someone they didn't recognize. Later, after the SEALs cleared the scene and the bar stood empty, Emily sat alone on the counter, staring at the wreckage. The storm outside had passed, but inside her chest it raged stronger than ever. Her secret was gone. Her life here. The quiet, ordinary existence she had built brick by fragile brick had been blown apart in the span of 10 minutes. Rains stepped in quietly, his expression unreadable. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "You did what you had to do," he said. Emily shook her head. "I did exactly what I swore I'd never do again." His eyes softened. "You saved them. That's what they'll remember." Emily wasn't so sure, because when she closed her eyes, all she saw were their faces, wide with shock, twisted, with fear, not at the cartel, at her. She was no longer just Emily Carter, the bartender, and she could never be again. The Driftwood Tavern didn't open the next night. For the first time in 15 years, its neon sign stayed dark, rain dripping steadily from the awning, as if even the sky wanted to wash the blood and smoke away. Broken glass still littered. The floor inside, and the jukebox, bullet hole smoking in its side, sat silent in the corner. Emily sat at one of the booths, her head bowed, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug she hadn't touched. Her reflection in the window looked foreign to her. Hair unkempt, dark circles under her eyes, a weight in her gaze that felt heavier than any pistol. She had been in firefights before. She had taken down men far more dangerous than the 3 she faced in her bar. But this time had been different. This time, her enemies hadn't just seen her. Her friends had too. And that was a wound no combat medic could heal. The townspeople were talking. Emily heard them even when she tried not to. In hushed tones, at the diner, in sharp whispers outside the general store, in awkward silences when she passed by. She fought them like a soldier. Who is she really? She lied to all of us. Maybe she brought the trouble here. She couldn't blame them. They were right. Her bar had been their safe place, their home away from home. And now, it was the site of a gunfight. The illusion of safety she had built for them, and, for herself, was gone. Frank had stopped by that morning. His eyes had been bloodshot, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette on her porch. I don't know what to say." His voice cracked with equal parts fear and affection. "You saved my life, but you also scared the hell out of me." She wanted to explain, to tell him everything. But when she opened her mouth, nothing came. No words felt like enough. So Frank had just nodded sadly and left, leading behind. A silence heavier than any accusation. That night, Emily sat alone in the tavern until she heard the door open. The Navy SEALs entered without knocking. Their presence filled the room like a storm cloud. Rains led the way, his eyes sharp, but not unkind. Behind him, Torres and McBride flanked the door, scanning the street outside before shutting it. "You all right?" Rains asked. Emily let out a dry laugh. "Do I look all right?" "You look alive," he said simply, sliding into the booth. Across from her. That counts for something. She studied him, the way he sat with casual discipline, every muscle ready yet relaxed. He belonged in this world of shadows and violence. She didn't. At least, not anymore. "They all know now," she whispered. "The town, everyone. I saw it in their eyes. Fear, distrust. I'm not their Emily anymore." Rains leaned forward, his voice low, steady. What they saw was someone willing to fight for them. Maybe they'll never understand everything, but they'll remember that. She shook her head. "You don't understand. I left this life for a reason. I wanted quiet, peace, normal." Her voice broke. "Now it's gone, and I destroyed it myself." For a long moment, Rains said nothing. Then he placed a file on the table. It was thick, worn, marked confidential. Emily eyed it warily. "What's that?" "Mendez," he said. "Our intel suggests he's planning to move into this region permanently. Last night wasn't random. It was a message. And unless we stop him, this town, your town, becomes his battlefield." Emily's stomach twisted. "So this is it. It doesn't end here." "No," Rains said firmly. "Not unless we end it ourselves." The SEALs laid out their plan. The cartel had a shipment coming in 2 nights from now. Weapons, cash, manpower. A convoy that could entrench Mendez's operation in the state. If it succeeded, the town would never know peace again. Emily listened silently, every detail dragging her deeper back into the world she had abandoned. Maps, call signs, supply routes. It was the language of her old life, one she thought she'd forgotten. But as she studied the file, her fingers traced the names, the faces. Her memories surged. She remembered the mission years ago, the one that had ruined her. Mendez had slipped through her hands then. She had promised herself she would never hunt him again. And yet, here he was, not a ghost from her past. A shadow creeping into her present. Her chest tightened. She could almost hear her old handler's voice. "Once you start running, you'll never stop." She looked up at Rains. "If I help you, if I go back into this, there's no undoing it." Rains's gaze was unwavering. "You're already in it, Emily, whether you like it or not." Mendez made sure of that. The following day, Emily tried to slip into the routine of town life one last time. She walked to the pier, the salty wind cutting against her skin. She watched children toss pebbles into the water, their laughter ringing in the air. For a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to sit among them, to be nothing more than the bartender who listened to their stories and poured their drinks. To belong here. But as she passed by, their parents pulled them closer, casting wary glances at her. The rumor mill had already done its work. To them, she wasn't Emily the bartender. She was Emily the liar, Emily the fighter, Emily the danger. Magnet. She stopped at the end of the pier, staring at the horizon. Tears stung her eyes, though she blinked them away. Her peace was gone, but maybe, just maybe, she could protect theirs. That night, Back in the tavern, she found the seals waiting again. Rains met her eyes, searching for her decision. Emily didn't hesitate. "Tell me the plan," she said. And just like that, the line she had drawn for herself years ago, between Emily Carter, the bartender, and Hart, the agent, vanished. She was both now. And she would fight, not for herself, but for the town that no longer trusted her. Because if Mendez wanted to burn it down, he'd have to go through her first. The seals laid out every detail, their voices precise, calm, clinical. Emily absorbed it all, the language of war rushing back into her bloodstream like adrenaline. For the first time in years, she felt alive. Not the hollow existence of hiding, but the raw fire of purpose. But when the meeting ended and the seals left, Emily stayed behind in the darkened tavern, staring at the wreckage. The broken glass, the splintered floorboards, and the faces of her neighbors still haunted her. They might never forgive her. They might never see her as one of them again. But if she succeeded, they wouldn't have to. They would never know the cost of the peace she was about to buy them. Emily tightened her grip on the pistol at her side. The bartender was gone. Only the warrior remained. The night was moonless, a kind of darkness that swallowed sound and sight. Emily crouched low beside Rains in the damp brush, overlooking the dockyard. A convoy of trucks idled below, their headlights cutting across the fog like knives. Armed, guards patrolled the perimeter, their rifles slung casually, their confidence unshaken. They thought the night belonged to them, but not tonight. Tonight, Emily had returned to finish what she'd started years ago. Her heart pounded with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not excitement, but resolve. Every muscle in her body hummed with the memory of training she thought she'd buried. Every breath she drew carried the weight of the town. Behind her, she glanced at Rains. His nod was sharp, steady. "On your mark," he whispered. For a brief moment, Emily hesitated. The bartender inside her, the woman who once served beers and listened to fishermen's stories, wanted to run, to hide, to keep pretending. But the warrior inside her, the one who had survived betrayal and exile, knew there was no going back. She raised her hand, dropped it. The night exploded. Torres and McBride opened fire with precision, their suppressed rifles whispering death. Across the dockyard, guards fell before they had time to shout. Chaos erupted as men scrambled for cover, their radios crackling frantic orders. Emily moved like she had never stopped. She slid from shadow to shadow, her pistol steady, her aim true. Every step was guided by instinct sharpened years ago. She rounded a stack of crates and found herself face to face with two gunmen. They froze for a second, surprised by the woman in plain clothes, before raising their weapons. Emily fired twice. Both fell before their fingers touched the triggers. The past wasn't gone. It was inside her, alive, dangerous, necessary. The convoy roared to life. Engines snarled as drivers attempted to escape with their cargo. Rains barked into his cums, ordering Torres to cut them off. But Emily saw something the seals hadn't. A smaller black SUV pulling away from a side exit, slipping into the fog. Her blood ran cold. Mendez. She didn't need to see his face to know it was him. Without thinking, Emily broke from cover, sprinting across the open dockyard as bullets whizzed past. Rains shouted after her, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of gunfire and engines. Her boots pounded against the gravel. Her lungs burned, but she didn't slow. She couldn't. This wasn't just a mission. This was her unfinished war. The SUV tore down a service road, its taillights glowing like twin devils in the mist. Emily darted toward a parked motorcycle, its keys dangling carelessly in the ignition. She vaulted onto it, kicked it to life, and tore after him. The night blurred into streaks of headlights and fog as the motorcycle screamed forward. Wind whipped her hair, the salty tang of the sea biting her tongue. Every bump in the cracked asphalt jolted her bones, but she gripped the handlebars tighter, eyes locked on the fleeing SUV. She was chasing not just a man, but the ghost that had haunted her for years. A face of every nightmare. The reason she had become a shadow of herself, Mendez. The chase led them inland, away from the docks and into the twisting backroads outside town. Emily ducked low as gunfire erupted from the SUV's rear window, bullets sparking against the pavement around her. She swerved, leaned, pushed the bike harder. Her mind sharpened, her fear burned away. She wasn't Emily the bartender anymore. She wasn't even Agent Hart. She was both. Whole. And she was done running. With a roar, she pulled alongside the SUV, leveling her pistol one-handed while steering with the other. She fired. The rear tire burst. The SUV fishtailed violently. Before crashing into a ditch, Emily skidded to a stop, dirt and gravel spraying. Her chest heaved as she drew her weapon, eyes fixed on the smoking vehicle. The driver's door creaked open, and then he stepped out. Mendez looked older, but no less dangerous. His dark suit was smeared with blood and dust, his eyes burning with the same cruel intelligence she remembered. He saw her and laughed, low and bitter. "Well, well," he said, his voice thick with accent. "The ghost returns?" Emily steadied her aim. "This ends tonight." Mendez raised his hands mockingly. "You had your chance once, chica, and you failed. Why try again?" "Because this time," Emily said, her voice cold, "I'm not running." For a long moment, the world held its breath. The only sound was the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Then, with a sudden snarl, Mendez lunged for his weapon. Emily fired once. He collapsed into the dirt, lifeless, his legacy of blood, ending in silence. The motorcycle ride back into town was quiet, surreal. The adrenaline drained from Emily's veins, leaving behind exhaustion and clarity. She had ended it. The shadow that had chased her for years was gone. When she returned to the dockyard, the SEALs had already secured the convoy. Dozens of cartel men were in custody, their weapons seized. The operation was finished. Raines met her with a steady gaze. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He saw it in her eyes. "It's over," she said simply. Raines nodded. "For now, you did what we couldn't." For the first time in years, Emily felt lighter. Not unburdened. The weight of her choices would always remain, but free. The town didn't forgive her overnight. Some never would. For weeks, she was met with silence, with suspicion, with wary glances that cut deeper than bullets. But, little by little, things began to change. One morning, she found a bouquet of wildflowers on the tavern steps with a note. "Thank you for saving my son." Another day, an old fisherman stopped her on the pier, pressing a calloused hand over hers. "We owe you more than we can say," he whispered. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Months passed. The Driftwood Tavern was rebuilt, its shattered windows replaced, its scars painted over. But inside, the atmosphere was different. Quieter, respectful. Emily worked as she always had, pouring drinks, listening to stories, offering a quiet smile. But now, there was something unspoken in every exchange, a knowledge that the woman behind the counter wasn't just a bartender. She was something more. And though some still feared her, others began to admire her. She had become a paradox, both ordinary and extraordinary. Emily Carter, Agent Hart, bartender, warrior, protector, a legend in her own town. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the bar filled with its usual hum of conversation, Raines slipped onto a stool at the counter. "Thought you were done here," Emily said, pouring him a drink. He smirked. "We never really retire. Neither do you." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Maybe. But I've found my place. For the first time, I'm not hiding from who I am." Rains lifted his glass. "To Emily Carter, the deadliest bartender I've ever met." She raised hers in return, her smile faint but genuine. For the first time in years, Emily felt whole. And as the tavern buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, she knew the truth. Legends weren't born in battlefields. Sometimes they were. Forged in the quiet corners of small towns, behind bar counters, in the hearts of those willing to fight for others. Emily Carter had been many things, but now she was exactly who she was meant to be. Not just a survivor, not just a warrior, a legacy.